Publishing world, there are more options out there for you than you might think. But which is the best way for you? This is The Writer's Journey. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is the superb Kayleen Williams. We're two authors on a journey to learn more with you, the audience, so thank you for joining us. Tonight's guest is a New York Times, USA Today, and Washington Post best-selling American writer of epic fantasy and science fiction. Best known for his debut series, The Riyria Revelations, which has been translated into 14 languages. He has been named one of the most successful self-published sci-fi and fantasy authors, and he joins us here tonight. Michael J. Sullivan, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's me. That sounded really impressive.
I copied and pasted it off of Wikipedia.
You did a good job.
Yeah. Wikipedia, you guys know what you're doing, and they collected all the facts, and thank you for making it happen.
All I did was show up. I apologize for being late. I was waiting to see the show come on, and I was going to jump in, but apparently that's not how it works. So,
well, that would
sorry
be
for the delay.
I think a lot of our audience would love to be able to do that.
It's like, yeah, let's just all go in. All of Doom. That'd be great.
Speaking of jumping in, we have Jay Clinton Slater. Welcome to the chat. Rick Partlow, Shadow's been here right from the start. John Bear Ross, Walt Robillard. Is there anyone I'm missing, Keely?
Nope.
Probably people on the Facebook side. So hello to everyone and people watching later.
Oh, we got Vaccaro over on the Facebook.
Yes. Yeah.
Beating it up. All right.
So Kayleen and I, we're authors in the indie space, and a lot of our audience, we are too. But we hear that there's this dichotomy in publishing between the traditional publisher and self-publishing. Michael, in your view, which offers the more reliable path to success for an author?
Well, that kind of depends on how you define the word success, and not everyone does it the same way. So, I mean, you could, if you define success as being, getting your book published. So if you want that, then actually I would advocate hybriding. Because that way you can leverage your traditional exposure against your ability to create more money per unit sale. And that tends to balance things out for you, and you're not, killing yourself quite so badly. But then again, if you want to be like Stephen King, then you probably just want the convenience of being able to take a book and throw it at a publisher and have them, deal with it. So it depends on what you're looking for when you define the word success, and it's different for different people, I think.
So we definitely got to figure out what do I want out of this book building world?
Yeah, and it's going to be different for a lot of people. A lot of people just won't feel that they're a success if they can't walk into a Barnes and Nobles and see their book on a shelf. If that's not going to happen for them, then it's very disappointing. Other people just really want to ditch the day job, and just spend all their lives writing. And if that's what you're doing, there's different routes to these things. And I suppose we'll get into that a little bit further later on when we start talking about hybriding, which I'm sure we will get to. Eventually, that always gets back to that. Certainly with me.
Yeah, I see a lot of authors, they put in a lot of time and energy and heartbreak into writing their book, and then it gets out there, it is self-published, but it's not seeing sales. And if you want to get to that place where you're making a career out of this, then you need to make those sales happen. It doesn't have to go through self-publishing or traditional publishing, but you want to get to that place. So if you're looking at an author who's trying to publish for the first time, which path would you recommend they tackle first?
I would say the one that works.
The one that works.
I know that seems absurd, but it's actually true. For instance, how I went about it is I got traditionally published first. A lot of people kind of don't realize that. Most people think I'm self-published, but I actually started out with a small publisher. So I was traditionally published first. I was all geared up to go self back before the Kindle. So I had 300 books printed and in like the trunk of my car to sell. But then I discovered someone did want to publish me. So I went with that. And it was in the process of working with them for my first 2 books that I actually discovered there's something called the Kindle. And that publisher was adamant about not doing Kindles because they thought it was going to steal sales away from their printed books. And so I went ahead and we just made the Kindle anyway, and we said, we'll give you the money for it, but I want it out there. But they were financially unable to continue supporting me, even though they had the next book ready to go. They actually couldn't find the money to print it. That's how good the publisher was. So after that, I self-published out of necessity. It wasn't because I said, hey, I want to be a self-published author. It was like there was no other choice. I had pretty much tried everyone else, and everyone else had turned me down. So I was confident enough that my books were of quality that I knew they were going to be successful. I just had to get them in front of people, and that's what I did. And then after that, I took the numbers that I had generated from my indie sales, and I took that to a publisher and said, look, do you want free money? Because I can give you that. And it's amazing if you go to a publisher and you say, here's free money, they'll actually say, yeah, we're interested in that. So it's whatever you can get to work. Now, I would probably try initially to do traditional, just because you kind of get a little ahead of the game there. But I wouldn't necessarily stay traditional. And again, it's going to depend on how you define your desires. I mean, if you're a person who is a control freak and you want to be able to control the cover and the title and every aspect about your book, you're probably not going to want to stay traditional. But traditional does help in a number of ways. It does. I mean, there's still today, there's a lot of, prejudice with people against people who are indie published versus those who are traditional, because they feel that, the traditional people have been vetted. And as a result of that, it's going to be a better book, and they can trust that more. And that's still out there. It was really out there when I started. So, I mean, I remember I would go on forums as a self-published author, and I would talk, and they would just say, get out of here. You don't know what you're talking about. And then I would go on the same forums later on after I was traditionally published, and they're like, oh my God, a real author's here. So it's true that does happen, and I'm sure it still happens.
Which is sad. And hopefully we can get away from that, because exactly as you're saying, whatever your road is to that success, if that means part trad, part indie, full trad, you freaking read a book and people have read it.
Yeah.
Success. All right. That's all I had to say.
Now, I heard that in the past, if you sign with a traditional publisher, you're signing a contract, they often have a non-compete clause. Contract, and that doesn't allow you to publish within a certain time frame other books. Is that still a thing that you have to?
Okay, so the first thing when it comes to contract, there's certain things you have to do. One is read it yourself. Two, understand what you're reading, and if you don't, find out what these weird words mean, because some words are legal terms that mean specific things, and if you're not aware of that, you're going to be in trouble. So there are generally like 3 clauses you really have to be aware of. One's the non-compete, what you're talking about, and that's a situation where they have it written in the contract that you cannot release any other books that might compete with your existing book that they're publishing. But they often don't generally specify what is in competition. So is it another book in that world? Is it another book with those characters? Is it another book in that genre? Or is it another book by you? It could be any of these things. And that means that contractually, if you sign that, they can tell you, you cannot do that. Sort of. The reality is that's illegal. And most publishers know that. And the reason it's illegal is because all the businesses, for the main 5 at least, are centered in New York. New York is a freedom of work law state. So as a result of that, it would be tried in New York. And you cannot have a no-compete that is that broad. In other words, they have to be limited by scope and time. So you can't have if you say for 2 years, you can't work in the travel industry because you're leaving one job and going to another, that's fine. But as it gets longer and broader, they won't uphold that, because it's essentially preventing you from being able to survive. You can't have a job. So when you talk about publishing, literally what they're saying is that you cannot have a livelihood for your entire life plus 70 years in the entire world in many cases. So that doesn't hold up in a court. So why do they have these things in contracts then if it's illegal? Well, actually, they have a little clause that says if any part of this contract is deemed to be illegal or unenforceable, it doesn't affect the other ones. So they're well aware of that this is a problem. But the fact is that they leave it in there for the very specific reason. I think my opinion on this is it's intimidation. Every single publisher has this. And if you try to come out with a book that seems similar and they don't want you to do that, they say, hey, you have this contract here. And unless you want to go to a lawsuit, you're going to abide by this. And unfortunately, that's never come up against me because I actually never signed a contract of that nature. In mine, I had the same kind of non-compete. And I told them with my very first contract, I said, I'm not signing this. And they said, oh, right, sure. First time published author, you're not signing this. And we're giving you lots of money, but you're not going to sign it. Right. I mean, no, I'm really not. And they couldn't believe that. And it took, I think, 6 to 8 months to negotiate the contract. And in that time, they had gone through and done my book cover, all the editing. They had set things up to be in catalogs for bookstores. So they were getting more and more invested in my book. And I'm like, right. You're going to be losing money here if you don't capitulate. And eventually they did. But what they did was they didn't take the non-compete out. They never take the clause out. And the reason I suspect for this is that these contracts are hardwired at corporate levels. So when you get down to the editor, they don't really have that much say. But what they can do is they can alter it because they can define what is a compete. So what I had them do was essentially, it was boiled down to the idea that I cannot release another book that has, I think it was something like 95% of the same exact words in the exact same order.
Okay.
Which I could live with.
Right.
So we worked that out for a very hard time. So yes, it's a non-compete you can defang, but you have to make sure you do such a thing because otherwise you can get yourself in trouble, or at least you get yourself in a situation where you have to play hardball with them, which I don't think most people want to do. So the other problem is you have, let's see, there's the next book clause, which states that you will not release any other books until you get their book out. And this can cause some minor problems as well. And then there's the right of first refusal. And that's an interesting one because the right of first refusal is one in which they get to say, you have to show them your book first. And if they turn it down and, good faith negotiating and say, we don't want this, then you can take it someplace else. But they have to have the first one to be the bid on it, which is fine. And I've never had a problem with that. But if they have wording in there that states the fact that if they do want it, then they get it as long as they pay the same price. That's still a problem because if you really hate your publisher and you want to leave them for someone else, they can always pull you back by simply paying you the same as someone else's, and then you have to stay with them. So there's little weird things like that you have to be aware of. So just read the contract, understand what you're reading, and don't let anyone else read it for you. You really have to do this yourself.
But I love that basically it's okay to fight these things. Like there's certain things that they're not going to change, but there are ways to make them more fair for you. And I love that it's okay that we can be like, all right, and negotiate those terms. Yeah,
I simply didn't need them. That was the thing. And that was the thing they couldn't figure out. Because I think at the time I was making, like $11,000 a month self-publishing. So I really didn't expect that they would be giving me all that much more money, and probably less because I saw the contract. They're only paying me a small amount per unit. And I figured a lot of my books are already sold, and like how many people were going to buy more books from me, right? Little did I know. So I actually thought that I was going to be losing money in the long run. But what I was doing was, the reason I went traditional is I was investing in marketing. Okay, so this is me going to a marketing company and saying, look, I'm going to pay you this amount of money, and in return, you're going to give me credibility with a lot of people and hopefully double my audience. And actually, they tripled my audience. So there is a benefit to going traditional. But the thing I didn't understand was they opened up doors to foreign markets, which I probably would not have been able to get if I hadn't been with a traditional publisher. And that, blew up really big. And I made more in sales overseas than I made here, certainly initially. So there was a huge benefit I didn't even know was they're waiting for me.
So tripled your audience size, got you into 14 different languages, got you all over the world.
Wow, you're really up on your data.
Wikipedia.
She's the best. Not all that.
To get to that point, you'd already built up your own fan base. You were already making sales, so you had data, and that gave you leverage with them. Most people, when they approach a traditional publisher, they're coming through an agent. Is that a step that you took, or did you skip that step somehow?
Oh, no. So like I said, I had an agent. She was really a screenplay agent from California because she was the only one I could get when I first started. And she shopped my book around and didn't get anything. And there was a few more names that she said, because she stopped representing me because her husband relapsed with leukemia and she just quit, understandably. But there was a few more small publishers she hadn't hit, and she gave those over to us, and we submitted to them. And that was the one who picked me up. So that's how I got my small press, which didn't require an agent for representation. But after I had made the money, after I had built the fan base, then we went to the Big Five. And at that point, I had hired a foreign agent, someone basically, because I had an offer come in from, I think, the Czech Republic was the first person. And that is one of the few things you really need an agent for, is foreign sales, because it is just a tangled ball of twine dealing with foreign countries and their taxes and all the different rules for different countries. So in order to do that, we did hire a foreign agent, and we asked her and we said, look, do you know of anyone who'd be willing to try and represent me for domestic? And she said, well, I'll do it. I'm like, all right. So she wanted to start her own agency anyway. So she took me and she went over to the Big Five, and that's how she got me into that step. So yes, I did use that. You pretty much always have to have an agent to get into into the Big Five. A lot of the smaller traditional publishers don't require agents.
Okay. And then is it an agent's job to help you through the contracts and to help you think through the non-compete clauses and stuff like that?
Okay, so agents are different for different people. Everyone has a different experience with agents. Some people need them for certain things, and other people do not. And some agents are really good at something, and others are not. So bear that in mind when you hear me talk the rest of this out, because don't take this as being happen for everyone. This is only me. So I actually don't see much value in an agent, because if the agents, as in my understanding and my experience has been, that there's this impression that people have that agents are aligned with the author, that what's good for the author is good for the agent, therefore is crucial. Agents have nothing to do with that. It's going to be you or your publisher who's going to be involved in that. And like I said, you have to, agents are not, I keep saying agents, editors are great, but you're the final say. And this is important for you to know as an author. You are in charge. The editor is working for you. They're trying to help your book be better. But when they say you can't do this, you say, normally no, but this time I think we're going to do that. This time I'm going to make a one-word sentence because, you know what? I'm the author. So you get
I love one-word sentences.
What's that?
So I love one-word sentences.
Technically, it's grammatically incorrect, but you can do that. So getting a good editor is hard, but it's not through the agent.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's exactly right. I love the editor thing because, all of us deal with editors. Keely and I do some of that work. But all of us, whether we're self-published or trad published, we will be working with editors. And often you come into that situation where there could be a conflict in editing style or expectations with the editor. And I like that you are identifying what you want from the editor, what you expect, what you're looking for, and then you communicate that to that person because they can learn, right?
Yeah.
Editors making suggestions, they're just suggestions. They're not trying to trample on your writing style or.
Right. And eventually they'll get to the point where they understand your style, and then they get to where they can almost mimic what you're saying. Like sometimes you can write an awkward sentence and they can put it together and rearrange it so that it actually reflects how you should have written it. And you're like, oh yeah. And then they'll give it back to you like, well, that's not a change. That's how I wrote it. Like, no, you changed it. So yeah, those are things you have to just get them to, like my wife is my best alpha reader, and she will do a first pass editing, and she's worked with me for so long that sometimes I can't tell her writing from mine. Sometimes I do, but sometimes she's gotten it down. She has my voice and she can actually change sentences. I'm like going, did I write that? So it's kind of hard. But yeah, that's really what you want to do with a good editor.
Yeah, your wife is like your power team. I've heard you on other podcasts. She heads up your beta team, right? She heads up your
she is, I don't think I have a list, but she is my alpha reader, my editor, my publicist, my agent. She runs my Kickstarters, beta things. She's my liaison to my distributors. Yeah, she pretty much does all the business end, so I can just write. But she's always been sort of an overachiever. I mean, you know, she was valedictorian of her high school class, and she just never quit. So.
And then are you her full-time job? Is that what happened?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, once she used to be an engineer, electrical engineer, and then she moved up to program manager. She was actually the president of a company. And then once she went back to working for someone else. And then once I got published, her boss kept asking her, so how are your husband's books doing? Because they were a little concerned, because as my books got more and more, successful, she's like, uh-oh. And eventually, yeah, she just like didn't want to go to work anymore, so she didn't have to. And I would have made it so that she could have just stayed home. I mean, she could do whatever she wanted. She could retire. It wouldn't matter, because it wasn't necessary for her to do this. But as I mentioned, she's a bit of a workaholic. So even though she doesn't need to, she probably works more now than she ever has.
Wow, that is cool. That is really exciting. So one way of going hybrid is to have a power spouse helping you do all the things so that you can focus on the writing.
Well, it certainly helps to just, disperse the responsibility of things. And now I have my daughter. She's also kind of helping out as well, because, we're getting a little older, and moving books around is a little harder than it used to be. But yeah, so it's becoming something of a family business at this point. That's
really exciting. So if you were to start out as an author in 2020 for the first time, would you, well, you already said you try to go the traditional publishing. Right. What would make the self-publishing route appealing to you?
The same one that caused me before, that I couldn't get traditionally published. But after getting traditionally published, then the next thing I'd want to do would be to leverage the additional income you can get from self-publishing. So once I got a deal with Orbit and Del Rey, I realized that I was making a fraction of the money through them that I could self-publishing. And since I already had a name, and they had already done most of what they could possibly do for me, which was raise my exposure, at that point, then I can put out self-published books, and their marketing, which isn't that big, but it is just being with the publisher, raises your profile. In doing that, I get to take that and leverage that to my self-published stuff, which sells, I get like 3-4 times more money that way. And that makes it so that I don't have to work as hard, because I'm making enough money to where I actually have a livable income. There are many authors, some people who appear to be quite successful, because, you see them in the bookstores, and they have, big displays for themselves. And a lot of cases, these people are people who have day jobs and are, struggling with bills, even before the pandemic. So that's kind of this dirty little secret, that even though you appear to be this big, successful author, you're really not. I mean, you're making books and people are buying it. You have lots of fans, but you're only making a tiny bit of what each book sells for. So that's kind of a problem. So if you hybrid between traditional and self, you get both the exposure, but you also get the money, and that makes things a lot easier. And then at the position I'm at now, I'm kind of transitioning out of traditional, because at this point it doesn't make financial sense for me. So, I mean, I would be losing a ridiculous amount of money if I stayed traditional. So in that case, it just makes it easier for me. I don't have to deal with, drama, and I don't have to listen to anyone else. And of course, I never did before anyway. You can get that from me, right?
So a lot of what I'm hearing is what works for you. What do you want out of this writerly world, and understand what it is you're really getting into. There's ins and outs for both the trad, for indie, and, line yourself up with the one that coalesces with you. Anyway, I'm trying terribly to segue into Spotlight before we continue on. That was horrible. Anyway, today's Spotlight is on Age of Myth, Book 1 of the Legends of the First Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. #1 bestseller, epic fantasy, sword and sorcery, military fantasy, action and adventure. One of fantasy's finest next-generation storytellers, continues to break new ground. Michael J. Sullivan's trailblazing career began with the breakout success of his Riyria series. Full-bodied, spellbinding fantasy adventures whose imaginative scope and sympathetic characters won a devoted readership in comparisons to fantasy masters Brandon Sanderson, Scott Lynch, and J.R.R. Tolkien himself. Now, Age of Myth inaugurates an original 6-book series. Since time immemorial, humans have worshipped the gods they call Frey. Oh, truly a race apart, invincible in battle, masters of magic, and seemingly immortal. But when a god falls to a human blade, the balance of power between humans and those they thought were gods changes forever. Now only a few stand between humankind and annihilation. Wraith, reluctant to embrace his destiny as the god killer. Suri, a young seer burdened by signs of impending doom. And Persephone, who must overcome personal tragedy to lead her people. The age of myth is over. The time of rebellion has begun. Click by now, or as what has been said, doom.
Very good. Did you write that, or where did you get that from?
Amazon, copy and paste.
Really? I've never heard that one, so I don't know.
That's your blurb, I'm guessing.
No.
It sounds good.
I checked what you had most recently, and you just finished up that series a few months ago.
Yes.
So if someone wants to read the whole series, it's all out now, and it sounds like it has everything that you could possibly want from a fantasy novel right there.
I know. I'm like, my finger's itching on this little Winky Poo that we have here. That sounds really nice.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because, I mean, that series has been done for years. It's only now coming out, but, I mean, I'm finishing up the next series. I'm writing the last book of the next series. So it's funny that people are just getting to that now. You're like, oh, yeah, right. I remember that. I remember that series. That wasn't too bad.
So long ago.
Since we just read the blurb on it, and maybe people are like, yeah, I want to read that book. Where did you come up with the idea for that series?
Well, unfortunately, so that is we mentioned earlier Riyria, correct?
Yeah.
And that book series takes place in what would be considered the high Middle Ages of a different world, but that time period. And in it, I refer to an ancient empire. And I also talk about gods and other things. So when I wrote that series, I purposely lied to the reader. And I knew this when I did it. I basically told them a fairy tale of how everything came about. And it was complete crap. But it was exactly what would have been handed down from the days of myths and legends. Everything gets synthesized into this very appealing story, but the reality was something completely different. And the actual stuff that I put in the book seems so trite and silly. I'm like, I really feel like I need to explain what really happened. So I had to go back 3,000 years to what would be considered like the Bronze Age, like Achilles and Troy and all that kind of time. Around that time period is when this all happened. So I had to go back to that time period and tell this long story that leads up to the creation of the ancient empire, which has already fallen by the next series. So it was 3,000 years ago, and I had to write that. And that's pretty much what drove me into essentially telling the truth.
Interesting.
No, but that's kind of cool though, because it's like you have, the myth. I always do wonder, I'm like, okay, this is the myth and legend of today. What's the truth? Like, where is the grain in this myth and in this legend, and like how far does it really go? Like, what really, and we'll never know. You've given your readers a piece of like joyous chocolate cake of ambrosia, and it's delicious.
Well, not only that, but the best part about that is that, so even though it's a prequel, people have no idea what's going to happen because I let them know really early on that this is not what you heard before. So you don't know what's going to happen, who's going to live and die, and that kind of thing. So it becomes a very original story. But it does tie in with a lot of Easter eggs to the existing story. And then now, at this point in time, I'm writing the Bridge series. So if I wrote about high Middle Ages, and then I wrote about, let's say, the Bronze Era with like the Greeks. Now I'm writing the Roman era. I'm writing the Empire. So that time period is being covered. So this will connect the two book series. And like I said, the first book of that will be coming out next year. They're editing it right now. So, or it's in beta. Might be in beta right now.
Do you have magical creatures or magical systems that like carry through in the world, or does the magic get? Is there magic? Does it get overthrown?
So in Riyria, I adopted sort of the Tolkien concept that magic should be limited and very small. You don't see it much. I mean, when you read The Lord of the Rings, not much magic actually happens. It's very, very limited. And I liked that because I wanted magic to be like, oh my gosh, when you really see it. I didn't want it to be everywhere and you get dull to it and it's no fun. I wanted it to be something really impressive. So I kept it very small and limited in doses. So in the first book series, there aren't any magic users anymore. There's only like one, and he's locked up. And then a young woman eventually starts learning how to do that, and she becomes like the first new real wizardess, if you will. But in the past, you see how magic came about, how humans got magic. So there's a lot more explanation of the magic, but I wouldn't really call it a system in the concept of like Brandon Sanderson or Brian McCullen have. They have very almost scientific descriptions of how it works, and that doesn't work for me because if you explain magic, it's no longer magic, it's science. So me, I prefer to have a magical essence of you don't know how it works, but at the same time, it has to make logical sense in and of itself. So your rules are self-internal to the magic, but the magic is not going to be so explained that anyone could really easily understand it. It has to have a certain degree of I generally reflect it on creativity. If you're an artist, you can do a painting, and the better artist you are, the better painting you can do. Not everyone can paint. Literally everyone can place paint on a canvas, but not everyone can make a pretty picture. And that's the difference between an artist, because the people who use magic in my world are called artists with a capital A. So art in my world is like creativity, and they're very similar in that nature. So
I think that.
Yeah, that's cool because when I think about the Middle Ages or the Renaissance, you immediately go to the art, which is a lot like magic in our world that we actually do have in its power. That's very cool. Do you have magical creatures like dragons?
Well, yeah. As the series goes forward, you lose more of the magical creatures because they've kind of been disappearing. But I do have something that is sort of like a dragon. I don't want to talk too much about it because it would be a spoiler.
Spoiler!
So we're not going to tell you that. But it's not a dragon, but it's similar to a dragon. So it should scratch anyone's itch who might want a dragon. But no, I mean, I also have goblins and your traditional dwarves and elves and all that kind of fun stuff usually seen in these areas. And I have one invented evil magical creature that I think I've only got really one. I have some other ones I speak of, but I don't actually have them interplayed in the story. But I have one really creepy one that I invented, an amalgamation of old folklore that I put together and created my own little Tinker Toy version of an evil creature. So
nice.
Hopefully it's scary.
All right. I've totally lost track of our questions, Kaylee.
Well, see, if we were starting out for the first time, you went there. Imagine a world where somehow... we talked about that kind of, we touched on that. Dead air, don't want dead air. I'm just going to start saying rambling thing as I'm trying to read at the same time. So this should get really interesting, folks. All right. How can an author take advantage of both publishing worlds? We've talked so much about that. Do you have any tips working with agents? Let's see. Ooh, audience question. Josh Hayes asks, what is the viability of breaking out in epic fantasy in the indie hybrid publishing world?
I did that, so pretty good.
Well, part of the question is, what if you're not Michael J. Sullivan?
Yeah, so if you're not you...
But I wasn't.
This is true.
This is the funny thing, is that, and I remember Neil Gaiman talking about this one time, it's like they always say, well, if you weren't this huge author, how would you do what you did? What do you mean? I mean, obviously I did it.
I would do this again.
this, I can kind of speak to this because this is actually part of the idea of if you write a series of books and you put them out as self-published and they don't sell, what do you do? Do you change your marketing around? Do you go traditional? What do you do? And my advice would be none of those, because that's probably not the problem. This is something I've encountered so often with new writers that they will write a book and then they will say, so I've written this book, I put it out there, I've done all the stuff I'm supposed to do, it's not selling. What's the problem? And I'm like, well, how many books have you written? And they said, this is the first one. I'm like, well, yeah, I know, but I mean, that's the first one you published, but how many books have you written to get to this point? And they're like, no, this is the first novel I've ever written. And I'm like, I think I got the problem. It's not your marketing. It's not whether you're traditional or self-published. You need to learn to write, number one. And there's this really scary thing that you just might not be able to write. I mean, it's not something that everyone has the capacity to do. I am of the opinion, again, my opinion only, let's make sure we understand that, that certain people have an ability to write and some people don't. And you can't be taught how to write. You can be taught the skill of writing, but that to me is 50% of what you're doing. 50% is learning how to use the language properly, learning how to do characterization correctly, learning how to intersperse dialogue and internal thought and setting and description and all that stuff you can be taught. But what you can't be taught is creativity. You can't be taught empathy. You can't be taught how to think like another person. You can't be taught what the next word is going to be. Mm-hmm. No one can teach you that. And I'm sure you've talked to people at parties or at bars or wherever you've been at, and you're sitting next to a person and they will be talking to you and you'll be like going, okay, time to find someplace else to be. Or conversely, you'll be sitting at a table and someone will just start talking to you and they're fascinating. And you're just like, my God, I could listen to you all day. That's a good writer, because writing has a lot more to do with how you think than how you contrive words together. It's how you approach an idea, how you tell it, how you are able to come up with ideas that make an interesting, entertaining conversation. And if you can do that on paper, you'll be a good writer. But we all know there's a lot of people out there who are incapable of doing that verbally, which means they're probably going to be incapable of doing that in written form. It has to do a lot with how you think. And the older you get, fortunately, you do tend to get more life experience, which allows you to speak to a wider range of possibilities. People who have had very little life experience have a very difficult time speaking about having lost a loved one. It's hard to do if you haven't. Or having gone through a breakup. It's hard to do if you haven't. If you've done it, you can speak very honestly, and it's going to touch your readers in ways that will, make them break their heart, right? But you really can't do that artificially. You can't just read other people and say, oh, I'm going to do what that writer did. That writer probably had some real life experience that allowed them to do that. So when you're finding that your books aren't selling, the first thing you probably want to do is figure out if you're writing a good book. Now, the question is, what's a good book? My definition of a good book is a book that, for this argument, is that it's a book that when someone reads it, they will go out of their way to get someone else to read it because it was that entertaining. If it's not that good, then you're probably not going to get anywhere, because all the marketing in the world you can put out there isn't going to get you very far. It might give you a boost in sales for a brief period of time, and then your book's numbers are going to drop like a rock. But if you have a book that other people like, then you just got to get it in people's hands. And literally, that's how I did it. I didn't have any special magical wand. And this speaks to the thing, how do you do it if you're not Michael J. Sullivan? Well, I wasn't. And literally the way I did it was I gave my book to people and said, please read. I did this to hundreds of people. And it took years until finally I think it was on Goodreads, there was a review for my book from a person who I did not give the book to. And that was amazing. They said, this is a great book. And I went, so the big mill wheel that I had been cranking by hand, suddenly I let go and it turned by itself, one tick. And I went, oh, it's happening. And that's when it began. And then what happens if you can get 10 people to read your book? One of them might suggest it to someone else. If you get 100 people to read your book, then one person might become what I call a super cheerleader, who don't just refer your book to their friend. They literally make it their life's work to make sure that every human being on the planet reads your book. If you can get 10, 15, 20 of them, most of your work's done. And that's really the key to it. But no one likes the idea of saying that you actually have to do it one at a time. I had a blog post one time that I wrote. I said it was like how to build a beach, because you do it one grain of sand at a time. And no one likes that because it's a lot of work. It takes forever. Most people want to get, become an author. They want to do it overnight. And you can't. It takes, okay, so I'm a bad example, I'll grant you. But it took me like 30 years to learn how to write. And then it took me another, 5-6 years to be noticed and start making sales and get a fan base. And then now we're coming up on, like, I guess 11 years, maybe 12 years now that I've been published. And I'm just now getting to a point where people like you would ask me on a podcast.
See, that is so true, because I've been saying, actually, for a long time, even when I very first started publishing, I'm like, this is a long game. I don't want to, put out my first book, strike it like a hot fire burning raging inferno, and then die into embers and no one remembers who I am. But if you're willing to play that long game, if you're willing to take each and every one of those steps, figure out where your next journey is, what you have right, what you need to expand on, learn better. You go talk to some people and get some life experience. If you don't have those experiences, get other stories in you, write fake stories, whatever have you. Do the steps, take the time, and you too might be just like Michael J. Sullivan. All up in here with podcasteds and book sales and being like, I don't want to be trad no more. I'm gonna check out this indie sphere a bit better. I love it. It's awesome.
The huge benefit is if you do it that way, which is the hard way, granted, it's the wax on, wax off Karate Kid way of learning, how to do this. If you do it that way, what happens is you build your own fan base. Now, there are a lot of people, particularly nowadays, who are using, marketing, and they're in the big, I forget what it's called. It's drawing a blank here, in Amazon, where you join into a large group and people get a subscription to what you're buying. And they just get your books. I forget what it's called now.
Kindle Unlimited?
There we go. Thank you. With that, you don't develop, I don't think you seem to develop the personal fan base. You just have people who are buying into it. People aren't necessarily getting, say, Netflix for one specific television show. They're getting it for everything. And if your television show leaves Netflix, that doesn't mean that they're going to leave Netflix and come get you. They're staying with Netflix because that's a solution. So as a result of that, you don't have that fan base. So what happens if for some reason you can't be on Amazon anymore? And this has happened. There's been some people who've been kicked off Amazon and they have no way to make a living anymore, because literally Amazon right now is such a large player in the industry that you kind of have to be on there. And there's certain people who have crossed the line and they've been removed. And now they're in trouble. Now, with me or with some other people, Stephen K. or J.K. Rowling's, they could just sell the books off their website and be fine. They could retire too and go off to a Virgin Islands or something, and they'd also be fine. But just saying, with me, I could do the same thing because I have an large enough fan base, and I do sell directly off my website. So if I lost any one specific revenue of income, I can shift to another. This is another thing that any businessman should tell you, is the fact that you want to diversify your income. You don't want to have it coming from one source. So and as being an author and selling direct, it's wonderful because instead of having one boss who pays you, and if that gets cut off, you're in trouble, you basically have millions of bosses, and you can lose a whole bunch of them and still be fine. So that's one of the benefits of being a writer. There are other benefits, but that's one.
Well, Walt has a burning question.
Yes. I was just going to say, we have a super last minute live question just popped up.
Yes, Is traditional publishing good for mid-list authors? He even paid for that question.
Oh, he super wants this answer.
Wow. Is traditional publishing good for mid-list authors? Yeah, my wife would really be the best one to answer that one. But she's what? All right, I'll ask you. So, is traditional publishing good for mid-list authors? We're calling in the backup team now.
Yeah, the Sullivan power couple.
Hi.
Yay!
Hi, Mrs. Sullivan. Good to see you.
This is a treat. I love it.
So,
He paid for this, so make it a good answer.
okay. So here's the problem. By definition, a mid-list author is not selling extremely high nor extremely low. Okay, they're in the middle, and because traditional publishing, the income per book an author makes is so incredibly low, it's really, really, really hard to make any decent money in the mid-list as a traditionally published author. Now, that said, you know, most mid-list authors to make any substantial money, you have to have many books. A good example I use is Jim C. Hines. Jim C. Hines is kind of like a good, solid mid-list author, and he had to get 9 books released before he was able to make enough money to quit his day job and go full-time as a writer. So if you're a mid-list author that can produce quite a bit of content, then yeah, it can be good. But if you're a mid-list author and you only have 1 book or maybe 2 books or 3 or less books, your chances of making any serious money are going to be highly limited by the fact that you're not selling many copies and you're not making much per copy. The other thing about mid-list that you have to understand is that in the publishing in the area, the mid-list is constantly being squeezed. In other words, if you have an author like Michael who sells quite a few books, they're making the bulk of the money for the publisher. The mid-lists generally are either losing the publisher money or just making a little bit of money. So in some respects, they don't have a lot of power with the publisher. So a lot of the marketing dollars is actually going to go to the larger authors who don't need the marketing money. I mean, if Mike puts out a book, it'll sell just because, you know, that he's got a lot of fans that are waiting for the next book. But mid-lists really need kind of that marketing support. But unfortunately, when you're in the mid-list, there's no money in the budget for you from the publisher to grow your audience. So it's a very hard thing. Bottom line is, dollar for dollar, if you were a mid-list author, you would end up making more money in self-publishing than you would in traditional publishing. But that's assuming that you can produce a book that has every bit as high quality as a traditionally published author. Because if you can't do that, then you don't have anything. So.
Oh, but this brings up an interesting thing. That one of the things we had when we were early on, before I had done self-publishing, after I was with the Big Five, we had some writers who had started series and they hadn't finished the series out, but they were being dropped from their publisher because their book sales were not doing that well. And in that case, we would say, well, why don't you self-publish? And they say, well, we can't because they don't have the money. And to do it right, they would need a lot of money. So actually, my wife, this cameo walk-on you pulled in, she's the one who came up with the idea of using a Kickstarter. And they said, oh, we can't do a Kickstarter. That would never work. So we went, well, let's give it a shot. So we did a Kickstarter for my science fiction book, which was turned down by the publisher. So we used that as a test case to prove that it could be done. And it worked. So this would be something that if you were a mid-list author who wanted to go traditional.
Technically speaking, you had a contract for Hollow World. It just wasn't.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't an advance that was high enough that I thought we
right.
wouldn't be able to earn more money on our own, which we did.
But it was a matter of if you're going to be if you're a traditionally published mid-list author and you're thinking of making the transition over to self-publishing, Kickstarter would be a great way to fund it. And also
because you already have have an audience.
And also there is an audience that you can get directly from Kickstarter. Can you hear me? Because what we didn't realize is when we went to Kickstarter, my fans were not the ones who funded it as so much as it was the Kickstarter people. So you will tap into a whole new reservoir of readers who will just want to back it because they just like backing cool stuff. And in doing that, you like sometimes double your reading base because you'll get this whole new section.
We only 30% of our backers for our first Kickstarter were existing fans of Michael's. 70% of them were new audience to us, and we did not expect that. We thought it would be like 90% would be from Michael's readers, and only 10% would come from new people. But it was quite an eye-opening.
It's one of those things. If you have the ability to try it, because it could open up all the doors. Things for you. It could start opening anything. I mean, I don't know.
Well,
try it.
It's funny you should say that because I have a saying, which is you never know unless you try, right?
Exactly.
And that's kind of how I've done everything in this business.
You won't believe how much trouble she's gotten me into with that saying.
Well, Michael, we gotta try.
Well, I certainly hope that was worth $5.
I'm glad you mentioned the Kickstarter. We had an author, Troy Osgood. He says, love Sullivan's work and he's a great model. Successful indie that got picked up by Trad and realized it can be better than indie. His Kickstarters knock it out of the park. And he's indirectly responsible for me hooking up with Athon Books. So there's that.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Yeah. He's a lit RPG author, and I love his books too. I've been reading his.
Lit RPG is hot. It's a really good market, especially in the self-publishing space. Traditional publishers don't seem to want to touch it much, but in self-publishing, it sells very, very well.
They asked the question earlier, which I didn't really have a good answer for because, I mean, my answer was I have no idea. But the question was, have you seen any recent changes in trends with traditional publishing over the last couple months? And I'm like, we haven't really worked with traditional publishers over the last year.
Yeah.
Well, it could be self-publishing either. I mean, like with the pandemic and people at home, their Kindles. Have you seen any?
Going with it, but
so I've read a lot of articles on publishing, and publishing's really been hurting during the pandemic for a number of reasons. One, the two largest printers, one is called LSSC Communications, and the other one is Quad Printing. They were at less than full capacity, so there were a lot of books that couldn't get printed.
These are the printers that most big publishers use.
Yeah, and so that was a problem. But also, a lot of the warehouses were shut down. Now, we actually had a title on press at LSC Communications during the pandemic. And it got delayed. Like originally, that title was supposed to come out May 5th. And with all the delays in printing, it actually hit the bookstores on June 23rd. So a lot of major publishers have been complaining that they can't get their books printed. That was number one. Number two is actually very interesting because Penguin Random House was having problems because Amazon wasn't shipping books because they weren't classified as essential products. So a lot of the books would actually their orders would not ship because they were sending out masks and gloves and disinfectant and other things. So that from a prioritized standpoint, a lot of books weren't shipping, and that was hurting. So Penguin Random House actually was working on a portal where you could buy directly from Penguin Random House, and they started taking over a lot of their shipping during the pandemic because Amazon couldn't get the orders out. Again, I read this in an article, and I'm kind of like, well, A, the publisher should have been doing that a long time ago, and B, do any of the people buying books know that? Because I mean, I would never think of going to the publisher, to Penguin Random House to buy books. I would go to Amazon or I would go to Barnes & Noble, et cetera. So there have been some changes in that respect. But I also read, again, this is another argument about publishing. So publishing took a big hit right early in the pandemic. And now it's kind of come out of the pandemic, and actually sales are going better than they expected them to be. And what they're attributing that to is the longer the pandemic goes on, the more people are turning to reading. Because like back in March when it started, like everyone was on Netflix, and then people kind of got tired of like binge watching stuff, and they wanted some new thing to absorb during the pandemic. So then they start turning to books. And now, apparently the sales of books right now, like in the last couple of weeks, is actually up a few percentage of what it was a year ago, because a lot of people were buying books for a while.
Nice. So it could be giving readers a new life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it could be helping. Like,
I know a lot of authors who, kind of lamented, oh my God, my book is releasing during a pandemic and how bad this is, because it's a pandemic and no one's buying books and so forth. But like we released Age of Myth on May 5th, right in the middle of the pandemic. And in fact, I just did a newsletter. I'm sorry, Age of Empire, right in the middle of the pandemic. And we've already sold just a hair under 50,000 units of that book since, May for the electronic versions and June for the hardcovers. That's pretty good. I'm not complaining about 50,000 books in a few months. So, a lot of people are like, wow, this is like the worst time ever to release a book. But I don't know how that compares to other releases because I just didn't run the numbers. But I can say that I'm not unhappy with 50,000 copies so far in that title.
The good thing that we have, I've found is that a lot of people have been writing me saying that it's a great time to have a book because you're trapped in your house, and good escape entertainment is something they seem to appreciate. So I'm just so impressed that both of you are just like so like riveted by what I'm sure by now you must be falling asleep compared to what all this stuff we've been throwing at you.
No.
Live for this stuff, man. I'm going to drink it all in. I'm going to sleep on it tonight and hopefully be able to put it to good use.
We're trying to make it work too. I mean, what you said earlier about what's the next word, back when you're talking about writing and just coming up with ideas in the first place and coming up with different characters and their different opinions and all that. I'm thinking, yes, that's the whole thing. What's the next word?
Yeah, there was a fairly famous comment that I think exchanged between Stephen King and J.K. Rowling, where she was upset with somebody and her handlers or her agents or something. I don't know the actual circumstances, but she was saying in her frustration, she turns to Stephen King and she says, they just don't understand what we do. And Stephen King responded to her and says, yeah, how could they? We don't even know. Which is true, because you don't really know when you write where do those words come from. Where does the idea come from? It tends to, when you start writing, it just kind of springs from the previous sentence, which leads you to the next sentence. And it's not something you're conscious of, and you're not really sure how it's happening. So that's why sometimes you have to write and you rewrite, because sometimes you have to find what it was you were trying to get in the first place. And that's a process which really can't be taught. It's just something that bubbles up inside of you from who you are and your personal experiences. So that's what I'm saying. In that respect, it's really hard to, put a label on how you can teach something of that nature. But you need to have the tools. It's like, if I give you a hammer and a saw and a screwdriver, you'll be prepared to do the job. But if you don't know how to do the job to begin with, all the tools in the world really aren't going to help you. So definitely important to have the tools, because as my daughter once said, she goes, well, even if you have a great idea, if you don't know how to communicate it, what good is it? I'm like, very good point.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. I don't know how this show could get any better. We have like surprise call-on guest who, by the way, you did ask. I hope that answered the question. And where did it go? It was right here. Now they're chatting again and pushed it all the way up.
This is for Mrs. Sullivan.
Yes. Oh gosh, no! I was going to click on it.
I'm in love with her. We need her as a consultant all the time. She is amazing.
Oh, here we go.
Why do I get the impression that like she
thanks for the answer, brilliant
star, and like she walks on behind me, and I'm like, oh, which is true. Do you have another question?
Well, it was you asked if the question was answered, and Walt, the very lovely man who paid for this answer, said thanks for the answer. Brilliant. And it was very good. It even answered more questions than I realized I would even have. So,
Any last questions from the audience?
y'all, this is your chance. We got the double team. What am I trying to say here? The power team.
Yeah, Ken Britz earlier said you've done an AMA or two on fantasy Reddit, but it would be interesting to hear your take on the evolving industry from someone hybrid. Was your shift based on the speed of trad compared to your novel writing, for example? The shift from going trad to self-publishing back then?
So certainly self-publishing is lightning speed when compared to traditional publishing. And traditional publishing is slow as molasses. There's only one thing slower than traditional publishing, and that's Hollywood, which is like excruciatingly slow. But speed to market has never been really our concern or an issue that drove us.
It doesn't affect me at all, because when I write, I just write books, and
he doesn't even know how
I stock them up.
He doesn't know how it's going to be published.
I don't even, like I was saying before, that you guys are talking about Age of Empire. I'm like, oh yeah, I wrote that series years ago.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just write at my own speed, and this woman here is the one who has to deal with all that crap. So.
Yeah. So when we did Legends of the First Empire, when Michael was writing that series, I was 100% sure it would be self-published. There was like no doubt in my mind that it would be self-published. But then Del Rey came along, with an offer that we couldn't refuse, and so we signed with them. So our decision about, like when to self-publish or when to traditionally publish has not been based off of, the speed of publishing, but it has to do with what is the best thing for the career at that point. So, for instance, the first set of books, Riyria, that came out through Orbit, and I already heard Mike talking about this, it tripled his audience, and that was good. And when he wrote the next two books, again, my thought was we were going to go back to self-publishing. But I thought, well, I don't want people to get the impression that, like, oh, he couldn't cut it in traditional publishing, so he was forced back to self-publishing. So we signed the second contract just, because, they came in with really good terms. Well, first they came in with terrible terms, and I was insulted. But then the agent went back, got more money, and I said, okay, I think this will be good. Now, with the Del Rey contract, again, those books, I was 100% sure they were going to be self-published, but they came in with an advance that I didn't think I could ever make that much money in self-publishing. I mean, I just looked at what my past history was in self-publishing. I'm like, they're giving me a much higher advance than we'll ever make. And I didn't think we would earn out the advance. I mean, the advance was so large that I said, well, we're not going to earn this out. And so let's sign the contract. Now, for what it's worth, we earned out that contract, which I didn't expect to do. But then we put out a couple more self-publishing books, and they were earning even greater than that contract that I didn't think we would ever get to.
Wow.
So now, so just to give you an example, for the first two books in the Riyria Chronicle books that were traditionally published through Orbit, the next two books in that series were self-published, and we've made 3 times the money on books 3 and 4 than we did on books 1 and 2. And usually, by definition, you'll make less money as a series goes farther out because, the audience keeps getting smaller, right?
Less money or less units.
Yeah. Well, we didn't sell less units, but we made a ton more money. But like in general, you got the number of people who read book 1, and then the number who are going to do book 2 is going to be some percentage of book 1, and the ones who do 3 is going to be some percentage of book 2, and the one who does 4 is going to be some percentage of book 3. But we made 3 times the money on the later half of that series than we did on the first half of that series. So, the publishers cannot, under their traditional terms, they cannot make me what I can make if we self-publish. And so, self-publishing is the way we go because then we have a lot more control. We get to choose the cover artists. We get to choose the editors we want. We get to have the books produced the way we wanted. Orbit never produced their the Riyria books in hardcover. That was a big contention with us. But when we self-published, We can decide, we can do hardcovers, we can do limited edition hardcovers, we can do, we just did a slipcase for the Legends of the First Empire series. So there's just a lot more freedom we can do, and we make a lot more money. So that keeps us in the self-publishing realm right now. The big issue, the big issue, and this is the change in publishing over the last couple of years, is that publishers are now requiring audio rights, but they're not paying additional advances for audio rights.
Oh.
And your royalty rate on audio rights can be incredibly terrible. For instance, the audio rights for the Riyria books were sold as what's called a subsidiary deal, where Orbit did not produce the books. What they did is they just sat on those rights and recorded books, knocked on their door and said, hey, we would like to buy these rights from you. And they said, yeah, sure, here, you can have them. And what happens in a subsidiary deal is the publisher gets half the money and the author gets half the money. But Recorded Books is getting a percentage of what Audible gets. So in the case of those Riyria books, we're getting a percentage of a percentage of a percentage. So we make like 3.5% per book.
Wow.
Now, later on, we sell those books to Audible Studios, and their standard, I can't tell you
what. Not the same books, but future books.
Future books. I can't tell you what our exact royalty rate is because that's under a non-disclosure, but their standard rate is 15%. So 15%
already better.
3.5%, right?
Oh yeah.
You can see that, like for every copy of the Riyria stuff that sells in audiobooks, we make pennies on it. Whereas the later books that we sold directly to Audible, and there's only two people in that equation, there's Audible and us. And in the Riyria stuff, there's three people in the equation. Four. There's Audible, Recorded Books, Orbit, us, and actually your agent. So there's 5 people. So, and there's just nothing they can do to sweeten that pot. Like the publisher's only making X dollars. So it's not like they can, give us a percentage rate that's going to be high enough to make it worthwhile. So because traditional publishers are now requiring audio, and because for instance, again, on that 50,000 copies I talked about of Age of Empire, 55% of those were in audio, and 25% were in ebook, and 20% were in hardcovers. So we really have to maximize our audio income, and by doing that, we cut out the traditional publishers. They will not sign us a contract without the audiobook rights.
Wow. Well,
that's a deal breaker for them.
Audio is doing really well and getting better and better.
Originally, it was only for print, and then ebooks did so well that publishers demanded to have the ebook rights and the print rights. And then after that, now audio has become so lucrative that now they want all 3. But when for us, we can sell that single audio right for more than a publisher can pay us for everything.
Yeah,
by a considerable amount. So it makes no sense for us to continue working directly with major publishers. Yeah,
our highest per book advance, which was for that contract I told you that I didn't think we would earn out, we have an audio only advance that's 3 times that amount of money. So we can sell one right for 3 times the amount of money we can sell all 3 combined rights. So it just doesn't make any sense for us to go traditional at that point.
So that's.
Oh, go ahead.
You go. No.
With the series that came out after the one that you earned out and you were surprised to earn out, do you attribute that to your fan base growing so much that you're just naturally selling more books to more people, or to audiobooks around the same time taking off and making you more sales through audio, or another explanation?
Well, so Michael's very fortunate, knock wood, in that he's not had a flop yet. Okay,
I'm working on it.
It's going to happen eventually. Like, it's got to happen, right? But like, all his books have done consistently better than the previous book. So his audience is always growing. But one of the things that there's kind of 2 mandates I have as Michael's business manager. The first is to ensure independence from any outside force that might make it so that we can't earn a living. And Mike already talked to you about non-compete clauses. That's a big one that, we fought those battles and we won, and that's fine. But the other thing is that, Amazon is great. We love Amazon. They've made us a lot of money, but they hold the keys to all the email addresses to all the people who have bought all our books. So what I do a lot of is selling direct to consumers. And by selling direct to consumers, that gives me two things. One is it gives me the email addresses of people who buy Michael's books. And two, we make a much higher percentage of the money because the middleman is cut out. No money is going to the book warehousing companies. No money is going to the Amazon. No money is going to the distributors. So whereas if someone buys a book from Amazon, let's say it's a traditionally published book, Michael will make 20% of that list price. But when I sell it directly to the consumer, I get like 80% of the list price. So, it flips it around a lot. So we do a lot more direct selling than I think your average author does. And we do that through both Kickstarters and through selling on our website. And then the other thing that, I try and do is I try to keep as much of the reader's money in our pockets rather than other people's pockets. The money's not going to the agent. It's not going to Amazon. It's not going to the publisher. It's all, it's all coming to us. So that gives us a better financial stability than, again, when we were talking about like the mid-list, so much of that money is going to other people, right? It's going to the agent, it's going to the publisher, it's going to the retailer, it's going to the book distribution company, that the author is getting just a little tiny bit. We do kind of self-publishing on steroids such that we cut out all those people for a very large percentage of our sales. And so even if Amazon disappeared completely, and even if Barnes & Noble, vanished and everyone went away, we would still be able to sell directly to our existing customer base and be able to live a comfortable lifestyle without needing anyone else. So that's one of my goals.
Yeah, this is part of what I was trying to say before. When you have people who are, successful appearing traditional authors, but they still don't make much money.
Yeah.
It's because they're making such a small percentage of what they're doing. So they're having to produce books at a rapid rate because they're living off of advances. And if they don't earn out those advances, they don't build up any back.
No continuing income.
Yeah, there's no continuing, so you're not getting any more next time. So you're just getting the same amount, and you're having to work very hard to constantly put out as many books as you can. So let's say you make a trilogy, and you sell that trilogy for, let's say, $20,000, and then you finish, you get that first book, you sell it to them. Now you got to write the next two, and you got to live on $20,000 for a year.
Well, for 3 years,
right?
By the time it all gets done.
So after that first year, you've blown all that money. You still got 2 more books to write, and if they take you 2 years, you've got nothing to live on. So you're kind of like an indentured slave at that point, where you're trying to finish this out. You can't make any more money, and that's how you dig yourself into a hole. So
there are a lot of authors that literally are living advance to advance, and so they sometimes they'll have several contracts, kind of built up, and they just have to, they have to keep producing, and it's a hard living that way. That first Kickstarter, that author that Michael mentioned, who the publisher wasn't picking up one of his series, and we said, well, he should Kickstart it, and he didn't end up doing it. He's constantly living off of advances and just barely squeaking by. Like, he lives in a very inexpensive part of the country. His expenses are very, very low. And he's always got, probably 2 to 3 books on contract that he's always having to work to. And that kind of stuff drives Mike crazy. He won't let me sell something until after he's done with it. But there's a lot of authors I know who, are in contracts and they've got the next 5 years of writing, and that just barely keeps their head above water.
And you don't have time to work on something completely separate and then sell it on your own.
That's correct.
Because you're working on the traditional published one that you've already signed a contract for.
Right. And Michael's not, the fastest of writers. A lot of people in self-publishing who are doing really well are doing what's called rapid release, where they're just churning out books, exceedingly quickly. Michael doesn't, he writes quickly. I mean, he can write a book in 3 to 4 months, but there's a lot more that has to happen to that book after that 3 or 4 months that he's written it. I mean, we have to go through the line editing and the copy editing and the layout and the formatting and the recording of the audiobook. And, what takes him 3 to 4 months, by the time all the other people are involved, there's many, many other months that go into it. So, we put out, recently, we put out 3 books in a 10-month period, and that just about killed me. I mean, that was way too rapid release. So for this next series, we're doing 1 a year so that we can kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah, the only reason we did that is because those books were all ending on cliffhangers.
Well, 2.
Oh, yes.
Well, yeah, 2 were cliffhangers, and I didn't want to torture my readers. I mean, the books were written, and it was a matter of there was a story that had to be written, and it had to be divided up into 3 books for printing reasons. So it's like I had to cut them there, and it was just people were gonna hate me. So we pushed to get them out so that the readers didn't have to wait. Because I knew once all the books were out, no one would care.
Yeah.
But when you have to wait a year to find out, that would drive people crazy. So that's why
It's agonizing.
Man, but everything you guys are saying through all of this is what's the next step? What happened before? How can I make it better? What wasn't working for this thing? How is this going to benefit me? These are all questions that seem obvious, but I feel like a lot of people don't realize to ask themselves is how is this going to benefit me and how can I reach there?
Yeah, it's constant, it's constant improvement, right? It's like, and at some point there's, Mike gets upset at me because I'm constantly looking at how to, how to get us more independent. And sometimes he's like, well, yeah, but you've got to have other people do some of this stuff. Like there was a time when I used to ship books myself. I mean, I literally.
How many times?
Yeah, we did a Kickstarter where literally there were 3,500 pounds of book that I shipped out myself.
Oh man!
So a ton and a half of books. And oh god, it was like the winter time, and we had to get the books off the truck and into a storage facility. I mean, it was just terrible. But we're in that particular situation. I had planned on having a fulfillment company help me with that, but then the fulfillment company got filled up, and they couldn't take the project on, and we were coming up on Christmas, and a lot of people had ordered the books for Christmas. So it's like the only way I can get them out is if I do them myself. But now we have a fulfillment house that does most of our shipping, and so Mike's always trying to get me to not working. Yeah, stop working. He's always trying to get me to get other help, and so now we've got we keep getting like this little empire. Like now I have I have 3 different warehouses, doing different books, and now instead of doing like print on demand, which most self-publishing does, we do print runs, and they go from there to the warehouses, and then I don't have to touch the books. We one of the coolest things I did recently is we just had a reprint Age of Legend, and in the past, when Michael signs the books, we get the books in cartons, and we have to take the books out of the cartons, and then he signs them. We put them back in the cartons, and we tape them back up, and we put them on the pallet. And again, it'll be like we'll move a ton of books. Now we're only moving them a couple of feet, from a pallet to a table back to a pallet. It's not like we were taking them down to the post office and stuff, but that still was a lot of work. So this last time, I had the printer print up signatures, which is the first 32 pages of the book. And Mike came into the printer and he just signed those signatures.
Let's go. Find a signature.
Yeah, it's 32 pages of the book before it's folded and bound into a book.
When they print on a really large sheet. All right. And then they cut it.
and fold it and cut
so that
it.
you get those. If you look at the binding of a book, if you look like right in here, these are signatures. I don't know if I can.
It's a book is made up of lots of little books.
But
Yes,
these are folded. Yeah.
Mm.
If you unfold it, that's the signature. So before they cut it, before they folded it, I would sign.
So
That's so cool.
So it used to take us like 2 days to sign, like 500 books. It took us what, 2 hours to do those?
Yeah, just do
because it was just a sheet, right? And in fact, we didn't know how it would be. So like both me and my daughter came down to help Mike sign the signatures, and it was totally useless because we didn't need to be there at all because they were just real light and easy for him to move from place to place. And, so we're always trying to find, better ways of skinning the cat.
But we had to talk the printer into doing it.
Yes.
They were
printer didn't wanna
unhappy
do it.
with like giving us those pages because they thought we would damage them and they wouldn't be able to put them together properly. So we had to convince them, no,
Yeah.
we'll come down. We're not going to damage them. We're just going to sign them. Then you can put them back in there. Eventually we talked him into it and it worked out okay. But.
Yeah. And now but the problem with that was Michael had to go to the printer, which isn't all that bad because LSC Communications, which is one of the biggest printers in the world, happens to be about 30 miles from our house, and we live in the middle of nowhere. But in the future, whatever printers we deal with, they're going to have to ship the signatures to our home so Michael can sign them on his kitchen table so he doesn't have to go to the printer.
Because it's all about me.
Goals, man. That's what it's all about. It's about goals. What's the next goal? What's the next step? Where was I before? Was that working? If it's working, keep doing it. What can I do better?
Right. Yeah.
Everything y'all have been saying, that's what I keep hearing over and over is, what can I do better based on what I've done before?
Yep.
We have worked very hard to explain this in great detail, and she's only heard one thing.
No.
What
I do?
There's so many pieces of it.
It's in here.
Well, and the thing of it is that this constant process improvement never stops. Like one of the things we did, recently was, we moved over to using Audible Studios almost exclusively because, we were getting a higher percentage rate and so forth. Now, what we have not done, although I think we're going to do for next time around, is we have not self-published our audiobooks. And the reason why we haven't self-published our audiobooks is because we get really good advances from Audible Studios. And we get a lot of marketing help from them because they give us really high advances and they need to recoup that advances. So they give us a lot of marketing support. But like the next book in the Riyria series, which is called Drumendor, is the 5th book in the series. And that book's not really going to get a lot of marketing push because that late in a series, they never do. I mean, publishers like to push the 1st book in the series, not the 5th book in the series. So I'm going to probably self-produce that one. But the reason for it is because I can disrupt another part of the industry because audiobook narrators don't get as much money as I think they deserve. They're regulated by SAG-AFTRA, and most audiobook readers do not get a royalty. They get paid an hourly rate based off of the recorded hours of the books. Okay. And they
finished hour.
Yeah. By finished hour. And they get paid a lot of money. I mean, they get paid hundreds of dollars per hour, but in the grand scheme of things, what that means is because they're basically doing work for hire, they're not
accumulating that back.
Yeah. They're not accumulating wealth, right? Like they can't get sick. Like if they get sick, they can't record, they don't make money. So by self-publishing, I can make whatever arrangement with my audiobook narrators I want to. And my plan is to start off by paying him his 20% above his highest hourly rate, number one, because I can give him more money and I will. But then I'm also going to work it in so that he gets a royalty. So just like we are, he's got the advance. And once he earns out that advance, then he'll be getting ongoing income for work that he's not doing. And I actually would love to see that this is something that the industry changes over because we contribute a lot of our success of our audiobook to our narrator. And traditionally what the audio producers have paid our narrator, although it's very good money, is not nearly as good as I think they need to be getting. So when I self-publish, I can throw more money their way. And I can't really do that when the audio producer is cutting their check to the narrator. If I go directly to him, I can pay him a lot more money, essentially.
You are pioneering like so many things. Like just to like be like, I could just like be a shadow and just like watch you work and just, that would be amazing. 'Cause you're just like pioneering things. She probably sits in there and it's just like coming up with crazy ideas, and then she'll wait like a week, and then all of a sudden she's like, Michael, we need to try this thing. And he's like, but we're still, no. It's going to be great.
Alien.
And I just want to see
Alien.
that. I want to.
We're talking next.
Yeah. It's, you know, you got to keep moving. You got to keep innovating. You got to keep, you know, going with the flow. Stay one step ahead.
Word praises for you, Mrs. Sullivan. You are beautiful. She walked on and the mic dropped.
Mic dropped.
Dream team. Well, thank you guys. Thank you both for coming on the show. It's been a long,
extended show, actually. I feel blessed.
Well, we're happy to be here, and we love talking about this stuff. And
we normally have people out to the cabin here, which is what you see.
Yeah.
So we have a fairly large like lodge here, and we normally have people like readers and writers. We've had a lot of aspiring writers come out. We had like, what was it, 24 at one time?
Yeah.
Last summer.
Conference.
So, which was a little too much. But this year, of course, nobody.
Yeah.
So
we don't get to talk to anybody.
We don't get to talk to anyone. So
we just talk to each other.
But the reason you're like, why do we have people here? It's because we have this wonderful place. We're in the middle of nowhere. We don't see anybody, which is okay for me because I'm somewhat of a hermit. But I realized she would like to see people. And I realized that I was sitting out on the deck and I was having a nice drink, and I was thinking it'd be nice in the evening time to have someone here who I could talk to about writing, and it'd be just a nice little salon you could have and talk and drink. And so I said, you know what? I tell her, maybe you should invite someone. What did we have, like 200 people?
No, it wasn't that many. But
wow.
Over
all the people.
No, I know. But there was a time when we actually had like,
we had 6 different groups in 1 week.
We did. We did have 6 different groups in 1 week. That was a lot. But usually it was more spread out, you know. But it's easy for Mike. I mean, I'm in the kitchen cooking lasagna and baking pies and stuff, and he's sitting out having drinks on the porch. So it's
my job. It's what I do. Okay. I have to, be entertaining and lounge and, let everyone think about how great I am.
As you think about that next word.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not nearly that profound, but I put it on the front.
He can talk a good game.
I can pretend.
Well, your pretend fronting is fantastic, and we could listen to it all night long. People in chat are just like gushing over both of you, and they're not asking us questions. They're just like, we need to go to the cabin, and we need to partake of the pies and the lasagna.
Get this COVID out of the way, and then we'll let people start coming.
We'll reopen.
Yeah, we enjoy it. It's just it's funny because we also we participate in something called Boondocker's Welcome. So right now we actually have 2 people who are here on the land, but they're living in their own little RV like unit.
Yeah, Boondocker's Welcome is that if you have a recreational vehicle, you can just stay here.
Yeah.
So they just drive on your land, they spend the night. It gives them a place to park it, as opposed to a Walmart.
So last night we were sitting around the pool and we were masked up and we had a nice little conversation and stuff, but they don't come into the house. So that allows us to have visitors without like actually breaking our COVID bubble, so we can chat. And in fact, the woman who is in there, she's actually writing a book, and she didn't realize that we were in the publishing game.
People have no idea who I am.
Wow.
Yeah, well, she's writing a book about RVing. They've been full-time RVing for over a year now. They've got a what do they have? They have an SUV. Where are they pulling with, an SUV? I think it's an SUV.
Yeah, I think a little SUV.
And they have a little pull behind trailer, and they've been on the road for like a year.
So we still have people stopping by, sort of. But
yeah. But
we're just this old pathetic couple who we have no friends, so we have to get people to come and say hi.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing people offering to help you in the kitchen as chefs.
We like chefs.
Sicilian lasagna.
I like lasagna.
Yeah.
Brownies. We're getting offers of brownies, all kinds of brownies.
There you go.
In exchange for your company.
There you go.
Just to hang out with you because you're that amazing. And I don't want to cut it off, but I have to cut it off. That's like my job is to be like, I am the Doomslayer. Here's the end of the show. So that's what I have to do. Because otherwise we're going to be here for like 3 hours. And I suppose we could contend for the longest show in KSM history. But I think the longest show was like 2 hours and 11 minutes. We're close, though.
There you go.
We could just keep going.
I'm sure we would bore you. We get into reruns.
Yeah,
we start saying the same things over and over again. I would start drinking, and then I would say really wild stuff and tell you old stories that you don't want to hear.
But we do.
I noticed you have something over there. What are you drinking?
Just water.
Oh, you just water? That bottle isn't active.
Secret water.
Right. No, there's a bottle of rum on my desk, but I wasn't drinking.
That's okay. That's we've been known to imbibe on the Keystroke show.
There's a couple of podcasts that involve drinking, and it gets pretty interesting.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of the people who were watching me kept typing in saying, "Drink more. It's getting funner."
Oh yeah, we did
because they're looking for spoilers. So we drink more and get more spoilers.
Yes, tell us about the creature.
One of our Kickstarters, and it was right after the Kickstarter closed. So Mike was having libations, and he was getting very close to spoilers. So I had to keep. Luckily,
they don't care.
Luckily, I was sober, and I was able to keep a little bit. I didn't let it go too much.
Yeah, all of our podcasts go very long.
They do.
I don't know why. I think people figure when they ask us a question, we're going to give them a 2-word answer, and that's it. Yeah. And then they're like, "You're going to wrap that?" Because we got 10 other questions.
No, we love the answers. We especially love the in-depth answers because that's what we're on. We're on the journey to dig deep on all the topics that don't get enough love. And
we really try and not do that because we can go forever. We can get very deep, and it's just I'm at some point I'm thinking the audience is sleeping now.
Yeah, I was outside your door and I was hearing the contract talks, and you did pretty good.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, I was impressed. Usually I do all the contract stuff, and it's but you've learned some things from watching.
But actually, you talking about when I was talking to them about contracts?
Yeah, like non-compete.
I missed one thing.
What?
There was the thing about next book.
The indemnification clause.
Yes, and I didn't clarify that. I mentioned that was something to look for, but I didn't say why. And that's the only thing I missed.
Okay. So contracts get more and more insidious. And one of the things that they started doing recently is there's something called the indemnification clause. And it's like the one paragraph that you totally don't want to read because it's boring as boring can be. And it basically says, I, the author, warrant that I am the writer of this book and nobody else wrote this book for me. And I'm not saying anything that I can be sued for and et cetera and so forth. And it's usually pretty boilerplate, so you don't really pay much attention to it. But not too recently, publishers started putting into the indemnification clause, I, the author, certify that this will be my next book release. Which can be a problem because the way the contracts are written, when you turn in the manuscript to the publisher, they have up to 2 years to actually get it out to the public. Contractually, wow. If they have up to 2 years to get it out, and if they don't get it out within 2 years, then you can request the rights back and you can get back. But think about that. Especially if you're a writer who's got several projects going on, that means it could be a 2-year period where you don't have any other books that come out. Okay,
because you're living book to book.
Yeah, and if you're living book to book, that can be a real problem. And because it's been slipped in the indemnification clause, a lot of people don't even realize it's there. Because And in fact, we had to get that out of one of our contracts with Del Rey, because Del Rey was releasing, one book a year, and the contract was signed in 2014 for publication in 2016. So the bottom line is, by the time that contract ran out, it could be 6 years where we could put out nothing but their books, right? And I couldn't allow that to happen because we also had the Riyria books that we were doing, and I didn't want there to be 6 years between titles in the Riyria. So I actually went to Michael in March, and I says, I need you to get a book written, and I need to publish it by December so that we can slip it in before this clause hits.
So I have no idea what to do. I haven't thought anything.
Yeah.
And she says, basically, I have about a month and a half from nothing to finish.
You did it longer, but you did it
literally, I did it in 68 days.
Yeah, you did it in 68 days, but I didn't say you had to do it in 2 months. I said,
well, in order to give you time to do the other stuff, I had to have
true.
it done pretty quick.
True.
So I did it in 68 days from just come up with an idea to having a finished product, which was pretty much drafted.
And then for the other book in the Riyria series,
that would have been Death of Dual Gaff. That would have been this one right here.
Yeah. Then the other book in the series, The Disappearance of Winter's Daughter, what we did to get away from some of this causality language was we wrote the book, we did a Kickstarter for the book, but we did not put it into the retail chain until a year later. So there was an entire year's worth of time where the only way people could buy the book was directly to us, because it technically wasn't published, because it wasn't in the you couldn't buy it on the market. You could only buy it from us. So that had the added benefit that for an entire year, all the sales had to come directly through us, and so we made really good money on each one of those sales. Then the language in the contract, with the non-compete came off, and then we put it out in the regular retail chain, and the retail chain sold a lot more copies than what we did by hand, but we made a lot of money because there was no middleman in there at all. So yeah, the indemnification clause in this next book in the series, you got to watch out for those things. And depending on what Michael has going and when he needs to do stuff, we can usually craft a contract that will meet both of our needs, because, like the Del Rey contract actually had a more strict non-compete clause than the Orbit contract had. But I had other cards up my sleeve I could play where I could still get some other books out, but that's because I defanged the indemnification clause and got that part out of there about the next published book.
And there's one more thing that I want to bring up, just because I know a lot of writers who have done this, and we've unfortunately heard about it afterwards. They were given a contract and they don't know anything about a contract, so they just sign it because, hey, I'm going to be published. And in some of them, they're so horrible they're abominable, horrible, because they literally sign away everything.
Yeah,
they sign away all their rights forever, including
adaptions,
everything.
The ability to adapt their stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like when you sign a contract, it's usually only going to be for the print rights and the ebook rights, and nowadays for the audio, and that's it. So no foreign sales, no world English rights, no television, no movies, none of this other stuff, no graphic novels. None of that is ever usually traditionally.
Graphic novels.
Is it now?
Yeah. What I do with graphic novels is I say if you don't produce the graphic novel within 2 years after the first book is released, then that right reverts. You can do some stuff like that.
But there's usually a out of print clause, which is hard to get with ebooks. But I mean, you really do need to look at that contract and talk to someone who knows what they're doing. Otherwise, you can really ruin your entire career for the first book.
You have to look at the contract with an eye towards the worst case scenario. There's a very famous thing about contracts that my agents never noticed and never said anything about, but it's kind of an interesting thing. So the way it works is the publisher has 2 years from after they accept the manuscript to put out the book. After they accept it.
Mm.
The question is, what happens if it never gets to acceptance?
Mm.
Then you could literally have the rights to that book tied up forever.
And this is kind of happened to some people.
It has happened to some people where they, and that's, and like Mike always has control over the content of his book. So like, for instance, the way I got the contract changed to, it says something like, if they can't agree on changes, the publisher may cancel the contract. But I made it be so the publisher must cancel the contract, because what that allows me to have is if they can't agree on changes, we always can get our rights back. Otherwise, they have a knife over our head saying, well, this book's going to go into limbo unless you agree to these changes, and I can't have Mike living under that, that criteria. So, and I know a lot of authors who, them and the editor can't agree, and the book just gets caught in limbo, and because they're not triggering that must publish within two years, because it's 2 years after acceptance, not 2 years after the contract starts. So there's you got to think about, like, what is the worst case scenario? What happens if we can't agree on edits? What happens?
Also, because most writers tend to be somewhat lacking in self-confidence, you don't realize that, as I said before, you're in charge of your book.
Yeah.
So I've always had.
If your contract is written that way. I
know. I was going to say. So you should always make sure that you're the one who has final authority. And we went. So we've been with Hachette, and we've been with Penguin Random House, and in both cases there was no problem with that. I always had the authority that was standard in the contract.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So then we went to a smaller publisher, Kensington, who wanted to have final say over the book.
When I read their contract, it basically said that they had final say over the contract, and so when the contract came in, I redlined it and I changed the language and I sent it back to them. And they said, well, wait a minute, I don't understand. This means you have final say over the book. And I said, well, yeah, of course. And they said, well, we don't do it that way. And I'm like, well, we don't do it any other way. And they're like, we've been in this business for 68 years, and we've never given final say of the book to the author. And I'm like, well,
that's a tragedy. How many authors have you screwed over? Because, like, see, I'm the author. I'm the one who wrote it. I get to say what's in it.
Yeah.
That's part and parcel of what it is.
And I don't know why that's never come up before, because this is a very large publisher. This is the largest non-Big Five publisher there is. And they were just like, I can't believe that you're going to make us do this. And I'm like, well, yeah, we're not going to do it any other way. So, and it was interesting because a lot of times when you negotiate something in a contract, you basically are setting up precedents that, can screw up the publisher for other things. So I was actually working on this contract with an agent, and the person at the publishing house kept saying over and over again to the agent, now you must realize that this is a one-time exemption for this particular author, and we're not going to allow you to sneak that in for other authors. And he's like, yeah, I know, but yeah, I mean.
That's always the thing when you're in the industry. You always find them say things like, well, this is standard practice. And
industry standard.
This is industry standard. And I kept thinking, like, not my industry.
Like,
I've always wanted to submit my contract to publishers. Rather than have them give me one, I want to write the contract and ask them to sign it.
It never would.
That'd be epic.
I mean, it's like, why does it go the other way? I'm the one who has the product. You're the one who's going to stand to benefit from that product. So you get to sign my rules because I don't need you. It's not something I'm requiring. I can make a living without you. So why bother?
The very first contract that we did, after I fought the battle with non-compete, which was 6 to 8 months, there was this other little portion of the contract, very, very, very small part of the contract. And I needed to get 4 little words inserted. And my agent said, there is no way you're going to get those 4 little words inserted. I'm like, well, there's no way we're going to sign this contract unless we do. And she's like, I don't know how I'm going to pull this rabbit out of my hat. And the 4 little words were, and the author agrees. And it had to do with marketing, because it basically, the way the marketing language was written is, the publisher shall decide at their sole discretion what marketing activities will be done for this book. And if that means sending the author on tour, then we'll pay for all the costs of the tour, including room and board and travel and this and that. Which the average author, you read that and you're like, oh, cool, I get to travel the country on the publisher's dime. Why would I agree to this? But because it didn't say, and the author agrees, that means you're literally their slave. And
Yeah.
say, you're going to Tucson tomorrow.
Yeah.
Contractually, you're going to Tucson tomorrow. And I was like, no, Michael doesn't roll that way. I can't make Michael go anywhere. So I'm like, if this contract's going to get executed, we've got to put those words in there. And I said to him over and over again, look, number one, you're not going to put Michael on tour because touring is very expensive and he's not a writer at the standing that requires touring. So that's number one. Number two, if you ask him to go on tour, he probably will say yes. I mean, he wants to make the book a success as much as you can. But in Michael's world, there's a huge difference between asking and telling.
Well,
and
yeah.
if you ask Michael something, the answer will be no. But if you ask him for something, you'll usually get a yes. And I fought over those 4 little words for a very long time. But they were very important words. I mean, there's no way if I put a contract in front of Michael and told him to sign it, he would sign it. And there was a time that I often wondered if I could just not get those 4 little words in there and he wouldn't know the difference, because I knew it was a moot point. It wasn't going to happen. But, I had to get it changed, and that took me another 2 months to get worked out. So
I'm a problem child.
you are. So
Man,
We're gonna have some books that people want to read. And we're going to be writing them and not touring instead, like Christopher Paolini did. And I'm not salty that I had to wait years for that 3rd book to come out. Not salty at all years later.
Yeah, I mean, it can take a lot of time out of someone's schedule, and Michael, I mean, one of the reasons why we have people come here is because it means that Michael doesn't have to go
there.
Although we were supposed to be traveling this year and that didn't happen, but
who knew that we were planning on going to see the world this year, only the world wasn't going to be there.
Yeah.
World's like, too late. Write another book.
We were supposed to be traveling from April 1st to probably mid-October.
Wow.
That didn't happen.
No, see, we don't normally take vacations. We hadn't for decades. And this was the year.
This was our year.
Oops.
We were going to do it this year. It didn't turn out that way.
Work out.
This is the year of perseverance and trying new things.
And I'm obviously able to make my bill, so what have I got to complain about?
That's true.
Yeah. And we're all stuck at home and with nothing to do but write, right?
Exactly.
It's great. It's great for writers right now. Yeah, because,
good environment.
Yeah, it's a good environment.
Unless, of course, you don't have enough money to keep the heat going.
That's true.
That's right here. Every writer needs a Mrs. Sullivan in their lives for the business side of things. I agree.
There have been talk about cloning me, but I don't think that would work.
We could just make her into a Google Home Dot.
Well, one thing I should mention, for your listeners, if you do get a contract and you want to send it to Michael's email address, I will take a look at it and I will let you know, if there's anything in there that I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, but I have. Oh my God, this poor author. I'm working with this author that I'm trying to help him out with his next thing. And he's got a contract with a very large publisher, and he's talked about how little money he's making per book, and I'm like, I don't understand that, because usually royalty rates are pretty standard and this, that, and the other thing. And he sent me his contract, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe what you signed. And I said, did you have an agent? He says, well, I had a publicist who looked over the contract and acted as my agent. I was like, oh, I mean, His royalty rates are terrible. But the worst thing in his contract was he had a deadline by which he had to turn in the manuscript. And for every day that he was late turning in the manuscript, he was being charged $100.
What?
Yeah, $100
Oh.
every day. So talk about like putting in some substandard work, right? I mean, like the book isn't done when you think it's right. I mean, it's done when the deadline hits because
It's like, it's today.
yeah,
Take it.
whatever stays in, it's done, baby. Because I'm not going on. Yeah, they actually were charging him $100 a day for
This
every
is
day.
why
he was
you
late.
read your contract.
Yeah, we've come full circle. Read contracts, y'all.
Yeah.
Get someone like the lovely Mrs. Sullivan here, who, if you have been listening this long, you just got one of the best nuggets of the show. Mrs. Sullivan.
Yeah,
It's like staying to after the credits to see that little extra thing they have in movies.
that's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
She's the extra video, and it is amazing. Just elevated all the things. Michael, you've been amazing.
But see, the good thing I get out of that is I get to see these contracts, you know, because I like to know like what some of these horrific things are out there so I can tell people like, look out for this. Because I only know what's in our contracts, and our contracts are pretty standard and they've been defanged, and, you know, I know how to like manipulate them. But then like I run into these other contracts. Like I said, I saw someone's contract that essentially gave the publisher the rights to adapt works and what was it? Derivative works. So the publisher could actually write a new book in their series without paying the author anything.
Ooh.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, that's like almost worse than the $100 a day.
Yeah, because it gave them the right to create derivative works on their own. So like they could come out with a new Riyria book written by some other author, have the Riyria stamp on it, but not pay Michael a cent, you know, because derivative works were in there. So
Wow.
all these little things you got to watch out for, and like
It's a dangerous world, though.
it's a minefield. And a good agent knows what some of the truly abhorrent things are, and they'll stop the truly abhorrent things like derivative works. I mean, a good agent will strike derivative works right off the get-go. And many times I think they put derivative works in the contract just so the agent has something they can strike out, so it shows they did something. But the things that they don't work on is like the non-competes and stuff, because A, it's industry standard to have a non-compete, and B, they can't get the publishers to flop on them anyways. So they just say, well, look, they'll say this is a good contract. And what they mean is this is a good industry standard contract, but it's not necessarily a good contract for the author. And that's what I think is some of the problem. I mean, Mike was talking about how, you know, like, who does the agent work for? Ultimately, the agent wants the contract signed because then they get their money, right? And I was talking to one author who did not read their contract, by the way, at all. Never read a single word of their contract.
Oh, no.
And I told them they had a non-compete clause, and they said, no, I don't. And I was like, yes, you do. Go read your contract. And they came back and they said, oh, I have a non-compete clause. And I said, of course you do. And I asked why they didn't read their contract. They said, because my agent is aligned with me, and if I make money, they make money. So thereby, I trust that they will only do what's good for me. And I'm like, yeah, but if you don't sign the contract, they get nothing. So they're not going to bring up to you, oh, by the way, there's this non-compete clause that may stifle your career for the rest of your life. Because if you knew that it was in there, you might say, that really doesn't sound like a good thing for me. And so this particular author now, unfortunately, he's abiding by his non-compete religiously, which he should because he signed the contract. But what I want him to do is take it to court and fight it because, as Michael mentioned, the non-compete is illegal. But it's going to take someone to go to court in order to
get it off.
Legality in order to go through it, and no one's just willing to do that. I've defanged my non-compete, so I can't do it. I would like nothing more than for someone to say, "Oh no, I'm sorry, this violates your non-compete," and then I'm like, "Let's go to court."
Which is why
Oh my goodness!
getting another traditional publishing contract because they just saw that.
Did we just discover the next Let's Try It?
Oh, all right. I know more, but this is
I thought you wanted to sleep, but no, you just had to go there.
This will be the last
I'm
story.
sorry.
Last story, I promise you. So, audio rights. There's something called non-dramatic audio rights and dramatic audio rights. Non-dramatic audio rights are like when a single narrator just talks about the books. Dramatic audio rights is when there's multiple actors and there's sound effects, and it's kind of like a play. Okay. So we had sold some dramatic audio rights to a company called Graphic Audio. And when I went to them for, we were doing a promotional thing, I said, I'm kind of surprised that you have not bought the non-dramatic, the dramatic rights for the Riyria series because it's a big popular series and so forth. And I said, oh, well, we tried to, but your agent said that, those rights aren't available. And I'm like, well, before coming to you for this little promotional thing we did, I took out my contract and I read it to make sure that I knew what was in there. And they are totally available. You can certainly have them. And they said, oh, well, I don't know why your agent said that, but okay, we'll send contracts over. So I called my agent and I'm like, what the hell is going on? You're supposed to sell my rights. Why did you say that those rights aren't available? I read the contract. It's not a problem. And the contract clearly says that the only thing we gave over was non-dramatic audio rights. And then the agent said, well, yeah, but that's not the problem. I said, well, what is the problem? He says, well, it's the non-compete clause. Because as Michael mentioned, our non-compete clause says that you can't produce any other works with the exact same words in the exact same order. And the non-dramatic and the dramatic audio is essentially that, right? Yeah. So my agent declared on their own that we would violate the non-compete clause. So he never offered the rights. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. You have two things in the contract that are completely competing with the other one. The other one clearly says you have the dramatic audio rights are available to you, and you have this non-compete clause that says you can't use the same words. You've decided to go the A route and said those rights aren't available. I say the B route, and they are available. And so sell them the damn rights. And they're like, well, we're just not really comfortable with this and that and the other thing. I said, well, look, actually they asked Orbit. I think they asked Orbit, and Orbit said the non-compete rights would come into play. But the agent never told me that. I'm like, the non-competes are in play, huh? All righty then. Let's go to court. So the very first thing I needed to do was I needed to make sure that I had a piece of paper from Orbit saying you cannot sell these rights because they will violate your non-compete clause. Because then once I have them say it's because of the non-compete clause, then I can go to court and I can challenge this whole thing. And I'm like ready to do an Indiegogo campaign to raise money for lawyers. And I mean, I was like the happiest person on the planet because I'm going to break the back of the non-compete. So I sent them a letter saying I'm looking to get a clearance letter from you to indicate that these rights are available to me to exercise independent of you. I was expecting them to come back and say, no, you can't have that right. It violates your non-compete clause. Unfortunately, they came back and said, oh, yes, of course you can have that right. Here it is. So you're like, oh, yeah. I wasn't able to take them to court, but
oh my goodness,
I would have been a very happy camper if I could have. But that's a long way of saying is the agent didn't even bother telling me that they couldn't sell that right or they had made a determination. I'm losing money out of my pocket because the agent is making some arbitrary decision. I said, look, that's not your call. You are here to make deals. If you think you don't have the right for that deal, then let's talk about it. And let's talk about how to break that logjam to get you the rights to that. But you don't just quietly behind the scenes tell a person who's trying to give me money, oh, no, we won't take that money because you think that I don't own that right. Ultimately, the court's going to decide who has the rights. But until a court says otherwise, I'm going to push one way. They're going to push the other way. And guess whose side you're supposed to be on? You're supposed to be on my side, not the publisher's side. And that happens a lot. But I promise that's the last story, and now we'll be out.
No, this has been amazing. This really has.
You keep triggering her.
Sorry.
Stop
I'm
it.
sorry.
I'm
so sorry.
I have these things that like set me off, and non-compete clause. I could talk to you for a week on non-compete clause. They are like the most heinous things that ever came into existence. And the terrible thing about them is most authors don't even understand they have them. They don't understand the implications of them. And the publishers put them in the contracts to intimidate authors. They're solely an intimidation technique, and to keep them underneath their thumbs. And all right. Last one, I promise. So when we first got the contract from Orbit with this non-compete clause in it, and it was a terrible non-compete clause. It was horrific. It basically said, for the length of this contract, which is copyright, till Michael dies plus 70 years. Oh no, he's breaking out the room. The author shall not publish nor allow others to publish on their behalf any work that may injure the sales of these books. That was the non-compete clause, right? So, like, what does that mean? He can't write any more Riyria books. He can't write any more fantasy. He can't write any more fiction. I mean, anything he writes could possibly injure the sales of these books. And, so, like, it was just, it was just this horrific non-compete clause. And now I've completely forgot where I was going with this. What was, Oh, shoot. What was it? Oh, so I went to, we were meeting with an author that was from the same publisher. And I said to her, like, how did you get around your non-compete clause? She said, I don't have a non-compete clause. And I was like, well, that's great because, now there's precedence. So I'll just tell the author, I want the non-compete in my contract to look like the non-compete in this author's contract, and it will be a done deal. She says, well, before I tell you that, for sure, let me go home and look at my non-compete and see what it is. And she went home and she read it. And she said, oh, you know what? I do have a non-compete. And it says exactly what you say. Now, what my agent told me is no one ever enforces the non-compete. It's like, well, yeah, but I can't sign something that's going to ruin Michael's career for the rest of his life on the hopes that they never come back and enforce it. So that's why it had to be defanged. And that what they use this for is it controls these authors, and the authors don't know that it's illegal. And so I know this one author the same author who didn't read his contract. So now he thinks that he can't produce anything except for his one publisher. So in that type of environment, do you think he's going to get really good advances from his publisher? Or do you think he's going to get really bad advances from his publisher? Because if you think that your publisher is the only place you can go, then they can basically offer you whatever you want, whatever they want, and you can't say no about it. So I was discussing, this is where I was going with this. So I was discussing online when I first got the contract with non-competes, and I was like, I cannot believe that any author in the world would sign these stupid non-compete clauses. I must be missing something here. And I was going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And this one lady wrote to me and says, are you seriously telling me that if your non-compete clause in your contract isn't changed, your husband will not sign that six-figure contract and he'll just piss that money away? And I said, I'm absolutely telling you that. And she says, what an idiot you are for posting this on a public forum. What if the publisher sees it? And I said, will you please write a letter to the publisher and point them to this thread so they realize that this is not a negotiating technique. This is the truth, and they've got to get it changed. So they thought I was being an idiot. And I'm like, no, like, and so kept going on. And one day, because I talk about non-competes all the time, and I talk about it in very terrible language. So one day, Orbit called my agent and told her to call me and say, you have to stop talking about things in your contract because your contract is private and there's a non-compete clause and you're not allowed to talk about these things.
There's non-disclosure.
Huh?
Non-disclosure.
Oh, sorry. Yes. There's a non-disclosure clause. You can't be talking about these things in public. And I politely wrote back to the agent, one, there is no non-disclosure clause in my contract. I've read it from top to bottom. Maybe the publisher should read their contract. That's number one. Number two, If you want me to stop talking about stupid things you put in your contract, stop putting stupid things in your contract. Number 3, if a publisher ever calls you to call me to tell me to stop, you better think twice before you pick up that phone to me, because we're not going to be doing much more business together, because you don't tell me what I can and cannot do. I follow the letter of the law. I make sure what I can say and what I can't say. And, you know, the mere fact that here the publisher was telling me I'm not allowed to say this, even though it wasn't in the contract, you know, that just really set me off. So yes, I could talk about non-competes for like ever. And I promise that is the last story.
And with that, because even though we could honestly listen to you all night, we've come full circle. Read your contracts. Know what's in it. If you're confused, if you're not sure, if you've never read a contract before, if you have been listening this long, Miss Sullivan,
send me a contract. I will tell you what's wrong with your contract.
Boom, done deal. Right? Lots of people out there willing to help. Trad, indie, if you can try it, do it. And that's all we got for you tonight. Be sure to check us out.
And you summed up in 3 minutes what took you 2 hours to do, right?
But guess what? That's what I do. I sum up an hour show in like 5 seconds.
There you go. That's all we needed. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us, Michael. Thank you so much, Mrs. Sullivan, for joining us. Excuse me. For Lauren Moore, I am Kayleen Williams. This has been The Writer's Journey. Be sure to check us out next week. We're going to talk about more reading, writing, and everything in between. Literally, all the dots, connecting all the things right here on Keystroke Mediums.